Handyman blocked the doorway with his arm, and I nearly walked right into him. "Mr. Callahan." He said my name quietly, the way people do when they don't want anyone else to hear. "You need to come with me. Right now." I didn't know his name yet. I'd seen him twice in the hallway of my daughter's building. Once fixing a leaking pipe near the elevator, once replacing a light panel by the stairwell door. Big guy, somewhere in his 50s, with a face that looked like it had seen a lot of weather. I'd nodded at him the way you nod at people at buildings. He'd nodded back. That was the extent of our relationship. So when he put his arm across the doorway and said my name like that, something went cold in my chest. "How do you know who I am?" I asked. He glanced down the hallway, then back at me. "Because I've been watching out for you, and right now you need to trust me for about 4 minutes. I'm 67 years old. I've been a high school history teacher for 31 years. I am not the kind of man who follows strangers into back stairwells." But there was something in the way he said it. Not aggressive, not nervous, just very, very serious, that made me take a step back from my daughter's door. "4 minutes," I said. "That's all I need." My daughter's name is Brianna. She's 34. Her husband's name is Joel. I should tell you something about Brianna first, because none of what happened later makes sense without it. She was the kind of kid who used to save her lunch money to buy books she'd already read at the library, just to own them. She cried at the end of Charlotte's Web every single time, even when she was 15 and pretending she was too old for it, when her mother got sick, really sick, the kind you don't come back from. Brianna drove 3 hours every other weekend, without being asked, without complaint, for almost 2 years. She was not the person I thought I knew. Or maybe she was, once. I don't know anymore when things changed. Joel, I never quite trusted. That's not hindsight talking. I remember telling my wife, Helen, about 6 months after they started dating. There's something off about that one. Helen told me I was being protective. She was probably right. I was. But I also wasn't wrong. Helen passed away 14 months ago. Pancreatic cancer, very fast, the way that kind usually is. She was 64. We had 41 years together, and I still reach for her side of the bed some mornings without thinking. After the funeral, Brianna was attentive. She called every few days. She came by the house twice to help me sort through some of Helen's things. For about 6 weeks, she was the daughter I'd always known. And then the calls started spacing out. And then they stopped. The apartment building is in Denver. Brianna and Joel moved there 2 years ago, when Joel got what he described as a major opportunity in commercial real estate. He'd been talking about commercial real estate for as long as I'd known him. Always a big deal just around the corner. Always something that was going to change everything. I'd mostly learned to nod. I drove up from Colorado Springs in early March because Brianna had invited me. She said she wanted to spend some time together, that she'd been feeling guilty about how distant she'd been. She said Joel had something he wanted to talk to me about. She said to plan on staying a few days, that they had the pull-out couch set up in the second bedroom. I thought it was grief, finally catching up with her. I thought this was her reaching back. I should have known from the pull-out couch. Their building has 4 bedrooms. I'd seen the listing when they bought the place. But I told myself maybe they converted the others, or maybe I'd misremembered. I parked in the visitor garage and took the elevator to the 14th floor, rolling my one bag behind me. And that's when the handyman stepped in front of my daughter's door. His name was Douglas. That's what he told me in the stairwell, after checking to make sure the door had fully latched behind us. "Doug Parrish," he said, and held out his hand. We shook. His grip was firm, unhurried. "You want to tell me what this is about?" I said. "I want to show you something first." He reached into the breast pocket of his work shirt and pulled out a folded piece of paper. When he handed it to me, I saw it was a photocopy, a document of some kind, with my name on it, my full legal name, Theodore Allen Callahan. It took me a moment to understand what I was looking at. When I did, my hand went a little numb. It was a power of attorney form, signed, notarized, my signature at the bottom. Except I had never signed it. "Where did you get this?" My voice came out steadier than I felt. "Property management office. I do maintenance here, but I also know the building manager pretty well. She found it in a stack of documents your son-in-law submitted last week. He was asking about adding his name to correspondence for Unit 1408. Said his father-in-law was aging and needed help managing affairs." He paused. She got uncomfortable and made a copy before she handed it back. Brought it to me because she didn't know what else to do. I stared at my signature. I've written my name the same way for 50 years. A slightly compressed T, the L's running together, a long open tail on the final N. This wasn't my handwriting. It was close. It was better than close. But it wasn't mine. How long have you known who I was? I asked. Since your daughter mentioned you were coming. I heard her telling the elevator guy you were a retired teacher from the Springs. Then I saw your car registration when you checked into the visitor garage. He shrugged. Old habit. I used to investigate insurance fraud. That was the moment I understood that whatever was happening, I was not going to be able to handle it alone. I did not knock on Brianna's door that afternoon. Instead, I called her from the lobby and told her I'd been stuck in traffic, that I'd be there by evening. She sounded fine. Normal. Asked if I'd eaten. I told her I grabbed something on the way. I sat in a diner 4 blocks from the building for 2.5 hours. I ordered coffee and a piece of apple pie, and I didn't eat either of them. I just sat there going through everything I could remember. The calls that had stopped. The way Joel had started asking at Helen's funeral about how the estate was structured, whether the house was in both our names, whether there was a will. I thought it was awkward small talk, the kind of thing people grasp at when they don't know what to say at funerals. I'd given him vague answers. I hadn't thought about it again until now. 2 weeks after the funeral, Brianna had asked me to scan and email her a copy of my Social Security card and my Medicare card in case she needed to help me with any paperwork in the future. I had done it. Of course I had. She was my daughter. I thought about the power of attorney form in Douglas's breast pocket. Signed, notarized. My name, not my handwriting. I also thought about something else, something small that I'd mostly dismissed. Last month, Brianna had sent me a stack of papers in the mail. Said it was for a family trust she and Joel were setting up, standard estate planning. She'd already talked to their attorney, just needed my signature on a few places. I'd skimmed them. Legal language has always put me to sleep. I'd signed where the sticky notes told me to sign and mailed them back. I put my fork down next to the uneaten pie. I took out my phone and called my own attorney, Ted Bauer, who I've known since we coached Little League together in 1987. He didn't answer, so I left him a message. I said it wasn't urgent, but I needed him to check something. I said, call me back when you can. Then I drove back to the building, went up to the 14th floor, and knocked on my daughter's door. Joel answered. He always answers. Ted! He said it like I was a surprise, like he hadn't known I was coming. He shook my hand with 2 hands, which he always does, which I have always found slightly aggressive. Great to see you, man. Come on in. Let me grab your bag. The apartment was beautiful in the way that apartments on real estate listings are beautiful. Everything arranged, nothing personal. I'd been there once before, about a year ago, and it had been different then, warmer. Helen's photograph had been on the bookshelf. Now there was an abstract print where it used to be. Brianna came out of the kitchen wiping her hands on a dish towel. She hugged me. She smelled like the same shampoo she'd used since college, something with lavender in it. And for a moment I just held on and didn't say anything. Dad, she pulled back and looked at me. You look tired. Was the drive bad? Traff, I said. She nodded and went back to the kitchen. Joel poured me a bourbon I hadn't asked for and sat down across from me with a big, easy smile. So, he said, good timing that you came up. We actually have some things we've been wanting to go over with you. Sure, I said. What kind of things? Just some financial stuff. He said it lightly, like it was nothing. You know, with Helen gone and the house just sitting there, it's a lot for one person to manage. We've been thinking about some options, ways to simplify things for you. I looked at him. I kept my face neutral, the way I used to keep it neutral when a student was lying to me about an assignment, the way you learn to do after 3 decades of teenagers. I appreciate that, I said. Let me get settled first. Long drive. I didn't sleep that night. The pull-out couch was as uncomfortable as pull-out couches always are. But that wasn't why. I lay there listening to the building settle, and I tried to organize what I knew in some logical order, the way I used to organize lectures. What I knew. A document with my forged signature existed. Joel had been asking questions about the estate since the funeral. I'd signed papers I hadn't fully read. My daughter had requested identification documents under the guise of future assistance. What I didn't know, how far this had gone, whether Brianna knew everything or just some things, whether she was a participant or being used herself. That last one was the question that kept pulling me under. I've known my daughter for 34 years. I know the difference between her regular voice and her guilty voice. She has a way of going slightly flat when she's hiding something. Her answers get shorter, her questions get more careful. At dinner that night, she'd been flat. Not unfriendly, just flat. I didn't know if that meant she was in on it or if she was just anxious about what Joel was planning. And not knowing was the worst part. Around 2 a.m., I gave up on sleep, put on my coat, and went out to sit in the building's lobby. Douglas was there. He wasn't pretending to work on anything. He was just sitting in one of the chairs near the mailboxes with a cup of coffee and a newspaper, like he'd been waiting. Couldn't sleep, I said. It wasn't a question. I tend to keep late hours, he said. I tend to keep late hours, he said. He folded his newspaper and looked at me. You went in. I had to see her. He nodded slowly. And I don't know yet, I said. I need to find out how far Joel's gone with whatever this is before I do anything. If I move too fast, if he figures out that I know he could accelerate. Douglas nodded again. I had the same thought. I looked at him for a long moment. You said you used to investigate insurance fraud. 22 years, retired out of a firm in Phoenix. He turned his coffee cup in his hands. When I retired, I needed something to do. Building maintenance turned out to suit me. Do you still know people? He was quiet for a second. Then, I still know some people. Why? I told him about the documents I'd signed last month. The ones Brianna had mailed me. The ones with the sticky notes. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, You need to know exactly what you signed. I know. I have a contact. Retired estate attorney. She could look at the documents if you have copies. I didn't have copies. I had been the trusting father and I had signed papers and mailed them back and not made copies because why would I? You don't make copies of things your daughter sends you. I have my attorney looking into it, I said, but it's going to take time. Douglas looked at his watch. Then you need to buy yourself some time. In the morning, I told Joel I was very interested in hearing about his ideas, but that I wanted to understand everything properly, and that I'd like to have my attorney look over any documents before signing anything. The smile didn't leave his face, but something changed behind his eyes. Something went very still. Of course, he said. Totally reasonable. I can get you copies of everything. I'd appreciate that, I said. At breakfast, Brianna was quieter than usual. She made eggs the way she's always made them. Too much butter, which is the right amount, and she kept her eyes on the pan while Joel and I talked about nothing much. Sports. The drive up. The weather in Colorado Springs. Just once, she looked at me across the table, and I couldn't read her face. Later that morning, while Joel was on a call in the other room, I went to the kitchen where she was washing dishes. Bree, I said. She turned off the water. She didn't turn around right away. I need to ask you something, and I need you to just answer me honestly. Not for Joel, just for me. She turned then. Her eyes were wet and she blinked it back, the way she's always done since she was small. Did you know, I said quietly, that there are documents with my name on them that I didn't sign? She stared at me. For a long moment she just stared. Dad, yes or no, sweetheart? Her chin did the thing it used to do when she was 7 and had broken something, and was about to admit it, a small forward push, almost imperceptible. I didn't know about all of it, she said. He said it was just to protect your assets in case something happened to you. He said you'd be signing them later. That it was just preliminary. I didn't. Her voice broke. Dad, I didn't know it was a forgery. I didn't know there was a forgery. I stood there in her kitchen and I looked at my daughter and I understood, all at once, that she was not the person who had done this to me. She was someone else who was going to need help. Ted Bauer called me back that afternoon. He'd looked into it. The documents I'd signed in February had transferred a limited power of attorney to a holding LLC. That, with some digging, traced back to a company Joel was a principal in. The transfer wasn't complete. My signature alone wasn't sufficient without additional steps, but the attempt was clear, and the forged document Douglas had found appeared to be step 2. Ted used the word fraud. He used it twice. He said he was going to contact someone he knew at the Colorado Attorney General's office. He said, do not sign anything else, do not leave, and keep your phone on. I went back to the lobby that evening and told Douglas what Ted had said. He listened with his hands folded in his lap, very still. Here's the thing about people like your son-in-law, he said finally. They usually have a timeline. They've built this over months, and they've got a sequence of steps in their heads. Now that you slow down and ask for attorneys, he's either going to pull back or try to accelerate. How do we know which? Watch the next 12 hours. If he turns friendly and backs off, he's pulling back and covering his tracks. If he puts more pressure on, if he escalates, then he's accelerating. That night at dinner, Joel refilled my glass twice without asking. He brought up the documents himself, casually, over pot roast, suggested that maybe we could just do a quick signing the next morning before I left. Keep it simple, nothing complicated. Accelerating. I slept better that second night, which surprised me. Maybe because I'd finally stopped pretending I didn't know what was happening. At 7 a.m., Ted called again. He'd made the contact at the AG's office. There was already an open inquiry into Joel's LLC, something involving a previous client, an elderly widow in Aurora. I was not the first. There were investigators who would be very interested in speaking with me. At 9 a.m., there were two people in the lobby who didn't look like residents. Douglas recognized one of them and gave me a small nod when I passed. At 10 a.m., Joel knocked on the door of the second bedroom where I was sitting and said he had the documents ready if I had a few minutes. I told him I had a few minutes. He spread them on the kitchen table. A lot of pages. A lot of places for my signature. He stood across from me with his arms crossed, still smiling, still at ease, and began to explain what each section meant in the smooth, confident voice he always used when he was selling something. I let him get about 3 paragraphs in. Then I said, Joel, I'm not going to sign these. The smile held for a moment through momentum alone. Then it faded. I know what this is, I said. I know about the LLC. I know about the document you submitted to property management with my name on it. And I know I'm not the first person you've done this to. He said nothing for a long count of 5. Then he said very quietly, You don't know what you're talking about. There are people downstairs who would disagree with you, I said. He looked at me for another long moment. Then he looked at the door. I think he was doing the same calculation I'd done 2 nights ago in the diner, trying to figure out how much they knew, how fast it was moving, whether there was still a way out. There wasn't. Brianna sat with me in the lobby for 3 hours that afternoon while investigators went through the apartment. She didn't cry. She just sat beside me with her hands folded in her lap, very still. And twice she put her head on my shoulder for a moment, and then straightened back up. I learned later that Joel had done this before. Twice, in fact. The widow in Aurora had lost close to $60,000. Another man out in Fort Collins had lost more than that. Both of them had been contacted already. Both of them were cooperating. The forged power of attorney document, combined with the LLC records and the testimony of the building manager who'd made the copy, was enough. Enough for charges, enough for an arrest. It moved faster than I expected. Most things in my experience do the opposite. Douglas shook my hand in the lobby that evening after most of the official vehicles had left. You did the right thing, he said. Not everyone would have trusted a stranger in a stairwell. Not everyone had a good reason to, I said. He smiled at that. Just slightly. That was 7 months ago. Joel's facing federal wire fraud charges. His attorney is negotiating, which is what attorneys do, but Ted says the case is strong. The LLC has been dissolved. The limited power of attorney I'd unknowingly signed in February was voided. My house in Colorado Springs is still mine. Helen's name is still on the deed beside mine, the way it should be, the way I intend to leave it. Brianna calls me twice a week now. She's living in a smaller apartment across town. She's in therapy, which was her decision, and which I think is a brave one. We don't talk about Joel much. Sometimes I think she wants to explain how it happened, how she missed it, how she let herself be led so far down that road without seeing where it was going. I don't need her to explain it. I've been a teacher long enough to know that smart people get things wrong, and that the people closest to us can be the hardest to see clearly. What I think about, sometimes, is the 4 minutes. Douglas in the stairwell, his arm across the doorway, asking me to trust a stranger for 4 minutes. The very specific number of it, like he'd already planned what he needed to say and had timed it. I asked him about that, the last time I saw him. He laughed a little and said he'd been going to say 5, but 4 sounded more credible. Maybe that's what it comes down to. Someone willing to stop you in a hallway and ask for 4 minutes. Someone with nothing to gain, who just thought you ought to know. I've been a teacher for 31 years. I have tried to be that person for other people. The one who pulls them aside and says what needs saying, even when it's uncomfortable, even when they might not want to hear it. It's a strange thing being on the other side of that. I don't take it lightly. I don't think I ever will. I spent 31 years standing in front of classrooms, and the one thing I kept coming back to, year after year, no matter the subject, no matter the grade level, is that consequences are not punishment. They're just the natural end of a sequence. You make choices, those choices build on each other, and eventually the structure either holds or it doesn't. Joel built something for months. He was patient and careful and, I'll give him this, genuinely skilled at it. But every choice he made, the forged signature, the LLC, the slow erosion of Brianna's judgment, the widow and Aurora before me, each one added weight to something that was never going to hold. Not because the world is fair, but because the architecture of that kind of scheme requires everyone around you to stay uninformed forever. And people don't. Douglas knew. The building manager knew something was wrong before she even understood what it was. Ted Bauer picked up the phone when I called him, and he knew exactly what questions to ask. None of that was luck. It was the result of a life lived in a way that gave people reason to act on my behalf when I needed them to. I don't say that to congratulate myself. I say it because I think it matters, that the quality of your relationships, accumulated quietly over decades, becomes a kind of protection you never see until you need it. I think about Brianna a lot, not with anger, more with the specific sadness of a parent who watches their child learn something the hard way and knows there was no shortcut to that lesson. She's a smart woman. She's also someone who loved a person who was very good at being lovable when it served him. That's not a character flaw. That's being human. What I keep hoping is that she comes out of this with her judgment sharpened rather than shattered. That she learns to trust the small discomforts, the moments when something feels slightly off. The voice that says, wait before you dismiss it. That's the thing about intuition. It's not mystical. It's just pattern recognition built from experience. I felt something was wrong at that apartment before Douglas ever stepped in front of the door. The pull-out couch. The photograph that was gone. Joel's hand on my glass. These were small things, and I almost talked myself out of every one of them, the way we do when we want to believe that the people we love are who we need them to be. I didn't talk myself out of 4 minutes in a stairwell with a stranger. I don't know exactly why. Maybe 31 years of listening to people who needed to be heard made me better at recognizing when someone was speaking plainly. Douglas wasn't dramatic. He wasn't asking for anything. He just said, here is something you need to know. That simplicity is what made me trust it. If there's anything worth carrying out of this, anything worth passing on, it's that. Pay attention to the people who want nothing from you except for you to know the truth. They're rarer than you think, and they show up when you least expect them. And if you're willing to stop and give them 4 minutes, sometimes they change everything.